Hello, Maddie, Emma and I are going to discuss Melbourne in the 19th century. The area of Melbourne has been home to First Nations people for over 40,000 years and serves as an important meeting place for local Kulin Nation clans. There are 5 groups of people from the Kulin Nations that are the traditional custodians of the land encompassing the Melbourne area. In 1800, the Lady Nelson was the first vessel to sail through Bass Strait. The decision was made to establish Victoria's first official settlement at Sullivan Bay near Sorrento the following year. Melbourne started as an illegal settlement. Despite opposition from the government in Sydney, sheep farmers from Van Diemen's Land, which is Tasmania, crossed Bass Strait in search of new pastures. Australia was colonised by the British from the 18th century. Included in these slides show what was known about Australia at the time on the world map and the early surveying of the area. This image shown is the depiction of John Batman's meeting with the Wurundjeri people at Merri Creek and the alleged signing of Batman's treaty. The treaty was for 500,000 acres, which is 200,000 hectares, at the head of Port Phillip Bay. The price was 40 blankets, 30 axes, 100 knives, 50 pairs of scissors, 30 mirrors, 200 handkerchiefs, 100 pounds of flour, and 6 shirts. Batman and his heirs were bound by a treaty to provide an annual rent of tribute of similar items. Like many depictions of this event, it was created many more years afterwards. John Batman's claim to his territory was based on the idea of European settlement, of land ownership and legal contracts, a concept that was completely foreign to the Indigenous people of Victoria. And for them, land was not about possession, but belonging. Territories may belong to different groups, but land cannot be bought or sold. There were many men that influenced the early creation of the city, including Sir Richard Burke and surveyor Robert Hottle. There were many options for the name of the city, which included the Van Diemen's, Batmania, Naarm, which is the Indigenous word for the area, Bear Brass, and Glenelg. Melbourne is distinguished from the other Australian states as it was founded unofficially by individual enterprise. Until separation in 1851, Victoria came under the administration of New South Wales and was known as the Port Phillip District of New South Wales. The birthday for Melbourne is the 30th of August 1835. In 1836, the first administrators of the Port Phillip district arrived, and in 1837 the new settlement was given its name honouring the British Prime Minister William Lamb, 2nd Viscount Melbourne of Kilmore. I will now pass over to Maddie to discuss the Melbourne landscape.
In the wake of European settlement, Melbourne's once tranquil landscape underwent a radical transformation over a mere few years. The picturesque rolling hills adorned with light forests were swiftly cleared to pave way for the construction of roads and buildings. Pastoral lands that once hosted grassy expanses evolved into enclosed areas for livestock, as sheep and cattle became fixtures behind fences. The indigenous land management techniques which had been practiced for generations were branded due to the obstruction of fences, impeding the regular low-temperature burns that were once integral to the land. In 1837, John Batman's optimistic accounts of Melbourne sparked a surge of people heading south, rapidly clearing the land of trees and shrubs to make room for new housing. The banks of the river saw makeshift tents and huts springing up as newcomers flocked to the colony, eager to be a part of this growing urban centre. In a mere 4 years, urban structures dominated the once bushy region. Low-priced lots fueled frenzied subdividing and resale for profit, boosting the economy. However, by 1841, overextension led to economic decline, unpaid workers, and depression. Recovery efforts, cautious land sales, and immigration brought revival, and by 1850, Melbourne had emerged transformed, with private land ownership dominating the city's growth, improved style and infrastructure marking a significant turning point. Fast forward a decade or so since colonisation, and the landscape around the falls was nearly unrecognisable. A sketch from 1853 depicts a thriving riverside scene, with a gentleman entering the customs house. However, an 1858 photograph reveals urban growth's toll, muddy paths, debris, and barren riverbanks. The city's expansion came at nature's expense. Pollution became a critical issue for Melbourne. The Yarra River, once a lifeline, became tainted by night soil and trade waste. Smoke and noise plagued the city, earning the nickname Melbourne. Basalt, commonly known as bluestone, sourced from nearby lava flows, played a pivotal role in Melbourne's development. Streets, footings and buildings owed much to this durable rock type. The first quarries were established along river banks, causing ecological harm. Over time, these quarries gave way to clay pits and other types of stone quarries as the city's needs evolved. The waterways played a significant role in shaping Melbourne's landscape, both ecologically and practically. Once cleansed by periodic flooding, these rivers were integral to the region's natural processes. However, urbanisation led to pollution and re-engineering efforts. The construction of dams and reservoirs aimed to provide clean water, but the re-engineering of waterways had cascading effects on ecosystems and landscapes. The city's urban planning faced challenges, notably stemming from Robert Hoddle's grid layout for Melbourne's streets and laneways. The grid's imposition on the existing landscape led to flooding and inadequate laneway sizes. Major engineering projects reshaped Melbourne's environment. The blasting of the falls, the creation of Coutts Canal were ambitious endeavours that aimed to address shipping issues and reduce flooding. However, these projects came with costs. Swamplands were drained, ecosystems disrupted, and Indigenous river crossings obliterated. I'll now pass over to Emma.
The gold rush in Melbourne in the 19th century. The discovery of gold in Victoria happened in 1851. This caused a mass migration to Melbourne. The city grew from a population of 23,000 to 123,000 between 1851 and 1854. Victoria had a population of 97,000 people in 1851, and by the time we'd reached 1861, that number had grown to more than 540,000 people, which at the time was half of the population of the whole of Australia. Thousands of people were arriving daily, and the city couldn't keep up with the demands. Every hotel and house was full to the brim, and makeshift temporary houses and huts were built for people to stay in. Prior to the gold being found, the city was a small port town, and now it had become a bustling area with ships, cargo, and thousands of people arriving. Life in the goldfields was hard. People lived in rough terrain without access to clean water and a steady food supply. Many people lived on meat from sheep and flour pudding, with no access to vegetables or fresh fruits, often for months at a time. Many would fall ill with cholera, scurvy, or typhoid, or return from the goldfields with no reward, malnourished and disappointed. There was a lack of sanitation and the general spread of disease. Apart from the widespread of disease, there was also a risk of the physical elements of gold diggings, shafts collapsing, asphyxiation, and blows from falling rocks, or getting killed by other jealous gold diggers. With their newfound wealth, people were spending money on expensive jewellery, silk, and alcohol. The population's behaviour was found hard to control by the police, and the city was described as a chaotic place to live. While most people wouldn't succeed in personal wealth through gold mining, the stories of succeed would keep them going. The infrastructure or lack thereof turned Melbourne into a muddy swamp during winter and into an area of frequent dust storms during summer. The city transformed quickly with its new wealth from the gold, and new constructions were built. Examples of this are Flinders Street Station that was built in 1854, which also became the first railway station in Australia, and also the railway line between Flinders Street and Sandridge, now known as Port Melbourne. Other buildings include the State Library, the Old Treasury Building, where gold was kept during the gold rush, and many schools, churches, and galleries. Melbourne became one of the fastest growing cosmopolitan cities of the era. After years of wealth and growth, Melbourne ended up leaving the 19th century in a depression era. It was also around this time that the city reached a population of 500,000 people. Melbourne was largely affected by the financial and economic crisis. Investments dried up, and a third of the otherwise working population lost their jobs and were left unemployed. Property prices began to drop, and the banks entered a crisis in 1893. The Commercial Bank of Australia, which was one of the biggest banks, closed their doors, and soon other banks did the same. Families were left to rely on food stamps and help from relief societies.